从小上语言课程，我们习惯用成绩与对跟错来决定自己的程度，但在实际的沟通上，事情往往不是这么的黑与白。那到底什么是能够让沟通更顺利的原则呢？Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. In the past few episodes, you've heard us talk a lot about context, and that it's usually not that black and white of do this and don't do this, and 5 phrases you shouldn't use, or 10 things you should do. A lot of times, the context and the outcome matter a lot more than the phrase itself. So today, we want to talk a little bit about that underlying concept and thought process of how to decide whether I should say something or I shouldn't say something, rather than looking at it black and white of do and don't.
我们从小到大学语言，其实不管是什么样的语言啦，第二个语言我们都必须得通过很多的考试嘛。那当然我觉得从零开始的时候，你是需要很多的一些规范，就是 what you need to do, what you shouldn't do， 比如说文法啊、字啊、拼音啊、发音，当然这一些都是需要一些rules。 但是当我们要进入了这个职场的时候，当我们必须要进入这个职场的沟通，你会发现有很多事情并不是这么的黑跟白， It's really not black and white。 那语言也当然就是必须我们要了解到 context, right？ 在这个情况可以用，在那个情况就不能用，所以我们很难讲说这个是错，哪个是对。那你也会发现我们在教课的或者是在分享很多内容的时候，我们很少会去教人家讲说 This is absolutely wrong or that's absolutely right。 甚至我们3个人 Nick 我还有 Andrew 的时候，我们在讨论一些事情，我们常常都还会有一些 debate， 比如说这个原则可以用在什么情况之下，但是有什么情况又不适用。 Sometimes I may say one thing and then you guys will actually bring completely different examples and different contexts where it would be suitable to use a certain phrase or certain words. So we have that discussion all the time about how do we actually talk about what is communication really。 那当我们没有对跟错，那会不会就变得有一点困难，就变成是很多人会不会觉得那我到底怎么样才是专业，怎么样才是好的沟通？
Part of this becomes it's really important to think about the end goal of your own communication or the end goal of your own message. So rather than thinking of in terms of like which word or which phrase should I say or shouldn't I say, it's about thinking of that outcome. Is this going to have the positive effect or negative effect that I'm looking for? And how do you phrase that out? A simple way to think about this is when we've done breakdowns in the past of CEOs giving bad news publicly. It's not necessarily about the words or the phrases they're using. They definitely weigh and have an effect on the outcome. But a lot of times, if they're both giving bad news, you will see that one has a more negative or very bad impression upon employees, where the other has another opportunity. Not necessarily every employee will be super happy about the bad news, but they may take it better. Or it may be less of a blow. That doesn't make it not bad news. But it's about the thought process of what do I need to say in order to create the effect that I'm looking for.
Yeah， 所以其实我们经过了很久的讨论之后，其实我们常常会以一个什么是 long term 什么是 short term? Usually when we think about right or wrong, it has to link with the short-term effect. 因为对跟错，我们会比较有点类似像考试嘛。考试你的成绩好就是对，你成绩好，错你成绩不好。那对我们来讲，这是一个很 short-term effect. 但是如果是我们想到 long-term, 你想到5年之后、10年之后，你现在做的这个决定跟你这个沟通的方式 did it actually bring you any positive effect? And if you really think about from that angle, then I can 100% sure that you will have a good communication, even though it may still be difficult. We're not saying that, oh, it will not be difficult, right? Sometimes you're still going to have to tell people bad news. You still have to have that very difficult conversation with people. But if it gives you a positive effect down the road, then we believe that's a really good communication.
So when you're thinking about your communication, it can come back to asking yourself the two questions that we've connected to presentation before.
Yeah.
That first question is, what do you want people to know? That's the baseline of your communication. What is it that I want to say in my communication? But then that second question is the one that may affect what is your word choice, what is your tone of voice, how do you handle things? And that second question is, what do I want them to feel? Do I want them to feel a certain way about this communication? Now it's about creating that context to develop the feeling and make sure they know what I'm saying.
Feeling 这个部分真的是大家很多人常常会忘记，尤其是在职场上的沟通来讲。但是我觉得现在也越来越多人能够了解到 feeling, emotion, 其实在我们沟通来讲是一个非常重要的一环。So another example I wanted to provide is, so I was just telling Nick the other day, 那在我们的 communication R&D 上面，我们的 IG account 上面，其实就有一个 follower, 他就留言跟我们讲说，我们之前有提供一个叫做黄金三明治的 shit sandwich method, right? 不知道大家还记不记得，也就是你要跟人家陈述一个 bad news 的时候，你上面跟下面可以来一个 positive news. So positive, negative, positive. 那当然 OK, 什么事情都有反面的，也有很多人就说他们很不喜欢像这样子的一个说法，觉得有一点假。Here's the thing, how you take the message and how you give the message is really up to you. 我们从来不会跟听众讲说你一定要怎么讲会比较好，或者是你讲的这个人家是怎么去感受的，我们不能知道。But of course, one way that's a positive effect, that gives a positive effect long term, is to add the layer of explaining how you communicate bad news. 如果你今天在你讲 bad news 之前，你先跟对方讲说 Okay, so I'm going to give you some feedback. I will give you some positive feedback, but I'll also give you some feedbacks that you can improve on, right? 如果你先 laid out 你的 outline, 你是怎么样跟人家 communicate 的话，那其实对方他要怎么样去感受那个 bad news, 他觉得你 are you fake or being genuine, that's really up to them. But you laid out how you want to communicate, and I think that has a positive effect.
The person who wrote the message does have a legitimate point in that sometimes when we do this shit sandwich, people will be like, ooh, I'm only going to listen to the middle. But back to this idea, that doesn't mean that you just don't use it. Doesn't mean like, oh, people expect it, we don't use it. Or in the case of others, it'd be like, always give feedback this way.
Yeah.
It really depends on the context. It depends on who you're talking to. And if done properly, it can be very effective. If done improperly, it can be a big red flag. So how you want to create that feeling also makes sense. Because if you took the reverse and just said, give them the bad news straight, some people may appreciate that. Other people would be like, whoa, you got to prep me for this. You can't jump into it.
Yeah.
Something that Sherry was just talking about reminds me of what we do in English when we say it's like, I've got good news and bad news. Which one do you want first?
Okay, yeah.
Right? Or it's just like...
You choose.
Yeah, you choose. Like, choose your own adventure. Do you want it up front or do you want to, like, build yourself up with something good? But it's that. It's like, what's the effect that I want to create? Do I just hit them with the bad news and then deal with the consequence? What does that let them know? What does that make them feel? Or do I have another pathway? maybe I do want them to know good news and bad news. I want them to feel more positive, so I may structure it a certain way. Thinking about that outcome makes a difference. Another very simple example of how you think about these questions, what do I want them to know and what do I want them to feel, is that topic we covered a few weeks ago about filler language. Filler words create a different feeling. And one of the things we looked at is it doesn't make filler words good or bad. To an extreme, there's a problem. But if I want someone to feel I'm very polished, I'm very professional, I will remove as many filler words as possible. If I want someone to feel I'm authentic, or I want them to feel I am trustworthy, I am human, leaving the filler words in there will give them a better sense of like, okay, this is not a robot, this is a real person.
Absolutely. 所以我想要给大家另外一个例子好了。Let's say we're going in a small talk situation, right? Small talk, 老实说啦，有的时候还真的蛮累人的。You know, after a long day of work, you have to chit chat with some strangers. You don't really feel like it. 但通常这个时候 let's say someone is thinking, okay, I don't want to do this, but what is the right thing to do? Right? 你可能会开始会想说，我应该要怎么做才比较正确？You may think about all the topics or sentence or the way you can ask a question. 但是如果你今天是来问自己 What would I say now so that this will have a positive result? 那这个 positive 就更广了一点。这个 positive 不是说只有对对方好像你问问题他能够回答，这个是 positive， 而是说对你自己呢？如果你自己现在的 mentally 不是非常的想要跟人家去聊天 You're feeling very tired, you know, you're very drained 如果你今天 push 自己去问人家几个问题你可能很快的你就会 completely losing interest 你反而会让这个 conversation 变得一个有头开始了可是并没有一个尾那如果你真的要很 positive 是不是你可以用另外一种方法 So if you're actually thinking about what would the positive effect given your current mental capacity, and I would say just ask some simple question and let them talk as much as possible and you become a good listener, not a question asker, but a listener.
Another way to look at this situation in a more broad context is if you just look at small talk as, okay, these are the questions I need to ask, these are the actions I need to take, here are the best ways to do good small talk, that also takes out the effect that you want to have. So, for example, we have pushed a lot that, you know, being a good listener is a big part of small talk.
Yeah.
But let's take a reverse look at that, which is when should you be talking the most during small talk? And one of those cases may be it's like you need to host this event and perhaps a lot of people at this event are shy or not big talkers. Rather than just asking a bunch of questions and then getting awkward silence back, maybe that's an opportunity where you need to be the host. You need to talk a little bit more. You need to make introductions, introduce people and their interests and then introduce them to someone else, talk about what their combined interests are and let that conversation spark as opposed to just standing around and waiting. Whereas, okay, maybe someone else, like the actual host of the event, needs more spotlight for them to feel like they're doing the right thing. Then that's a case where you just go in and you ask a few questions and then stand back and then let them shine, right? So it's that context and thinking about what's the outcome that I want. Do I need to spark conversation? Do I need to be a good host to get a bit livelier of an atmosphere? Okay, I will do action A. Or is it more like, as Sherry just built in her pause, like, I'm not really feeling it, but I don't want people to feel I'm rude. So I'm just going to ask just enough questions to let someone talk, but maybe not get in a deep enough conversation where if I zone out that it won't become awkward when they're like, what do you think about this topic? And be like, oh, yeah, sure, it's great.
Because honestly, when you're tired, you zoned out. Like we all do that. Sometimes I don't even know what they're talking about. But you really don't want to get into that situation as well. 因为当然那样子我觉得反而会给人家一个比较 negative 不好的影响 right? So I think it's really like the overall what is the positive thing to do here. 那另外一个 example 就是如果你今天在开会 是你的 turn, you gotta speak, you gotta make a presentation. 突然有一个人过来插话，那可能你是那种很有礼貌的人。Usually Taiwanese, we're pretty polite. Like we wait for our turn. 但是其他国家并不一定会 wait for their turn.
Right.
They may cut in whenever they want. 那这个时候我们是 the right thing 可能就是我们就是等到他讲完 or what is a positive fact 如果你今天是觉得我的 positive fact 就是我能够让我的 headquarter 老板知道 I am authoritative I am a really comfortable communicator and I'm a good leader 那可能这个 positive fact 的话会让你觉得那我今天是不是要 also say something so that he or she would stop talking so I can continue my point, right? So 什么事情其实都有一些并没有什么对跟错 to be really honest. To think about what the positive effect that you really want.
Right. So a lot of times in that instance when someone feel like, oh no, I want to be polite. I want people to view me a certain way. And you get that anxiety of like, okay, if I cut this person off or if I talk back, is that going to make me look rude? But then you have to think to a point we discussed earlier, long-term effect versus short-term effect. Maybe some people will be shocked if you cut that person back off or whether you say something to get them to stop talking. As long as it's not overly rude or you're not using a lot of explicitive or curse words, there may be a bit of shock, but the positive thing maybe is they're going to see you as someone who takes their position very seriously. Or also, there might be a message that you want to convey that makes your region look positive. And it's more important to get that message out than to create that moment of shock, like, oh, is there going to be a fight here?
Yeah. So again, we just really wanted to lay this out with you guys. 因为我发现真的我们跟其他的很多英文教学的一些内容有一些不一样的地方，就是我们真的不是很喜欢跟大家讲说什么叫对，什么叫错。我们要从这个 concept, we need to move away from that in order to be a better communicator.
We hope that you've enjoyed this peek into the underlying mindset and thought process when it comes to how do we decide what phrases we should talk about the context of as opposed to the black and white, yes or no, do and don't. As we go forward with future episodes, continue listening for this thought process. And the next time you have a question, be like, should I say A or should I say B? Ask yourself those two questions. What does it affect what I want them to know? And what does it affect how I want them to feel? And then, if you can answer those two questions, you may find it's a bit easier to choose the right phrase. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.